So yesterday we had a sermon on Acts 21, and it was a sermon of pitfalls, things that we do, that they did years ago in Acts 21 in Jerusalem, and how they are some of the same things that we do now. Christ, though, is our help. He is our hope. But when we follow him around those pitfalls, it still is a hard and narrow path. And that reminded me of this part of Prince Caspian in the Chronicles of Narnia, this great story from C.S. Lewis. And I thought we could have a little bit of adult story time as it didn't fit into the sermon yesterday. The siblings that are from the first story, the four siblings, including the youngest Lucy, are on this dangerous journey. And they're trying to cross this river to a place where they need to get to. And Lucy, the youngest sibling, sees Aslan. And she thinks that they should follow him. Aslan is this lion, for those who have not read the story, and he is the rightful ruler of Narnia, but he's mysterious. And he beckons her to go up. And they're at this crossroads. They have to make a choice. Do we go up, as Lucy says, to follow Aslan, who no one else has seen? It's a difficult crossing, though, through a gorge. There's no guarantee that's a good way to go. Or do they go down into this valley, looking for a great river to cross? And that seems the more sensible thing. And so they go down. And down is the wrong choice. Down is just trouble. They can't get anywhere. And they camp for the night when Aslan comes calling Lucy again. And she gets up and she finds him. So I'm going to read from this story from Prince Caspian. Aslan, dear Aslan, sobbed Lucy at last. The great beast rolled over on his side so that Lucy fell half sitting and half lying between his front paws. He bent forward and just touched her nose with his tongue, and his warm breath came all round her. She gazed up into his large, wise face. Welcome, child, he said. Aslan, said Lucy, you're bigger. That is because you are older, little one, answered he. Not because you are? I am not. But every year you grow, you will find me bigger. For a time she was so happy that she did not want to speak, but Aslan spoke. Lucy, he said, we must not lie here for long. You have work in hand, and much time has been lost today. Yes, wasn't it a shame, said Lucy. I saw you, all right. They wouldn't believe me. They're all so... From somewhere deep inside Aslan's body, there came the faintest suggestion of a growl. I'm sorry, said Lucy, who understood some of his moods. I didn't mean to start slanging the others, but it wasn't my fault anyway, was it? The lion looked straight into her eyes. Oh, Aslan, said Lucy, you don't mean it was. How could I couldn't have left the others and come up to you alone. How could I? Don't look at me like that. Well, I suppose I could. Yes, and I wouldn't have been alone. I know not if I was with you, but what would have been the good? Aslan said nothing. You mean, said Lucy rather faintly, that it would have turned out all right? Somehow? But how? Please, Aslan, am I not to know? To know what would have happened, child? Said Aslan. No, nobody is ever told that. Oh dear, said Lucy. But anyone can find out what will happen, said Aslan. If you go back to the others now and wake them up and tell them that you have seen me again and that you must all get up at once and follow me, what will happen? There is only one way of finding out. Do you mean that is what you want me to do? Gasped Lucy. Yes, little one, said Aslan. Will the others see you too? Asked Lucy. Certainly not at first, said Aslan. Later on, it depends. But they won't believe me, said Lucy. It doesn't matter, said Aslan. Lucy comes back, and she has to wake up the sleeping band of her siblings and also a dwarf, and convince them convince them that she's seen Aslan again. She saw him the first time, and she's seen him again, and they have to go. And they all get up, some more reluctantly than others, and they begin to march along, to follow Lucy, who is following Aslan, but through dangerous ground, through narrow paths. So at last, this is now skipping ahead a couple of pages, at last they got on the move. Lucy went first, biting her lip and trying not to say all the things she thought of saying to Susan, who hadn't believed her very clearly early on. But she forgot them when she fixed her eyes on Aslan. He turned and walked at a slow pace about 30 yards ahead of them. The others had only Lucy's directions to guide them, for Aslan was not only invisible to them, but silent as well. His big, cat-like paws made no noise on the grass. He led them to the right of the dancing trees. Whether they were still dancing, nobody knew, for Lucy had her eyes on the lion, and the rest had their eyes on Lucy. And nearer the edge of the gorge, cobbles and kettle drums, thought Trumpkin. I hope this madness isn't going to end in a moonlight climb and broken necks. For a long way, Aslan went along the top of the precipices. Then they came to a place where some little trees grew right on the edge. He turned and disappeared among them. Lucy held her breath, for it looked as if he had plunged over the cliff, but she was too busy keeping him in sight to stop and think about this. She quickened her pace and was soon among the trees herself. Looking down, she could see a steep and narrow path going slantwise down into the gorge between the rocks, and Aslan descending it. He turned and looked at her with his happy eyes. Lucy clapped her hands and began to scramble down after him. From behind her, she heard the voices of the others shouting, "Hi, Lucy, look out, for goodness sakes! You're right on the edge of the gorge, come back!" And then, a moment later, Edmund's voice saying, "No, she's right. There is a way down." Halfway down the path, Edmund caught up with her. "Look," he said in great excitement, "look! What's that shadow crawling down in front of us?" "It's his shadow," said Lucy. "I do believe you're right, Lou," said Edmund. "I can't think how I didn't see it before, but where is he?" "With his shadow, of course. Can't you see him?" "Well, I almost thought I did, for a moment. It's such a rum light." "Get on, King Edmund, get on," came Trumpkin's voice from behind and above, and then farther behind and still nearly at the top, Peter's voice saying, "Oh, buck up, Susan, give me your hand. Why, a baby could get down here. And do stop grousing." In a few minutes they were at the bottom, and the roaring of water filled their ears. Treading delicately like a cat, Aslan stepped from stone to stone across the stream. In the middle he stopped, bent down to drink, and as he raised his shaggy head, dripping from the water, he turned to face them again. This time, Edmund saw him. "Oh, Aslan!" he cried, darting forward, but the lion whisked round and began padding up the slope on the far side of the rush. "Peter! Peter!" cried Edmund. "Did you see?" "I saw something," said Peter, "but it's so tricky in this moonlight. On we go, though, and 3 cheers for Lucy. I don't feel half so tired now, either." Aslan, without hesitation, led them to their right, farther up the gorge. The whole journey was odd and dreamlike. The roaring stream, the wet gray grass, the glimmering cliffs which they were approaching, and always the glorious, silently pacing beast ahead. Everyone, except Susan and the dwarf, could see him now. Presently they came to another steep path up the face of the farther precipices. These were far higher than the ones they had just descended, and the journey up them was a long and tedious zigzag. Fortunately, the moon shone right above the gorge, so that neither side was in shadow. Lucy was nearly blown when the tail and hind legs of Aslan disappeared over the top, but with one last effort she scrambled after him and came out, rather shaky-legged and breathless, on the hill they had been trying to reach ever since they left Glasswater. The long, gentle slope, heather and grass and a few very big rocks that shone white in the moonlight, stretched up to where it vanished in a glimmer of trees about a half-mile away. She knew it. It was the hill of the stone table. With a jingling of mail, the others climbed up behind her. Aslan glided on before them, and they walked after him. Lucy, said Susan in a very small voice. Yes, said Lucy. I see him now. I'm sorry. That's all right. But I've been far worse than you know. I really believed it was him. I mean yesterday, when he warned us not to go down to the fir wood. And I really believed it was him tonight when you woke us up. I mean, deep down inside. Or I could have if I'd let myself. But I just wanted to get out of the woods, and I don't know. And whatever am I to say to him now? Perhaps you won't need to say much, suggested Lucy. I suggest reading all of these stories. They're great. But it's such a picture of the difficulty of following, especially when we may feel alone. But the path, it's not necessarily all roses and butterflies when we follow Jesus. But it's the right one. It may be dangerous, but we're not alone. And it's a time to be thankful that we do have the church that we journey with, that we have one another for encouragement, that when we are feeling down or when we can't see, we can have others who are with us to help point the way. And that's all of our jobs, is to help point not to ourselves, but point ahead, like Lucy to Aslan, point ahead to Jesus as he does guide us in these trying times. Give it all a read. Hope you've enjoyed Adult Storytime.